Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. And in what may or may not be an intergenerational episode, we're doing a discussion of what's the best version of the English Pokémon theme. Not sure that's really possible to definitively answer. I think you can definitely say which version has the most cultural relevancy, but qualitatively, I think that's a little more of a personal preference thing. But all the same, we've picked out 4 official versions of the English Pokemon theme, otherwise known as Gotta Catch 'em All. We did limit ourselves to official versions for this to narrow it down a bit. We did also try to pick versions that were, in terms of arrangement and whatnot, distinct from each other, so that they gave us more to sort of talk about there with less repeating. But the 4 versions we picked out were the Season 1/To Be a Master version by Jason Page, the first movie version by Billy Crawford, version XY by Ben Dixon and the Sad Truth, and the Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions version, which was arranged by, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, but Chad Sider and Jerome Moore. So we will talk about a few other versions, because I think there's a few that certainly bear mentioning, especially when talking about the cultural impact and legacy of this song. But they do have one major thing in common. They all pretty much have the same lyrics, and we sort of wanted to talk about the writing and that aspect of it before we get into the individual versions. So, as I'm sure a number of you know, the English Pokemon theme was written by John Siegler and John Leffler. Now, I have interviewed both of them. Unfortunately, we didn't really talk too much about this particular song, but they have talked about it a little bit here and there. Basically, they were asked by 4Kids and or Norman Grossfeld to write a theme song for this TV series that was being localized into North America. And they did that, and of course, so they were the folks behind that, as well as a number of the other early season themes and other music throughout the series. So, very important names there. But as far as the song itself, and in particular its lyrics, it's important to note that whenever you have a vocal theme song for something, whether you're doing something like Ghostbusters or DuckTales or, a more modern series, like a sitcom or something like that. In any case, the theme song sort of works as a value proposition. It gives you an idea of sort of the themes of the show, the characters, and a few other things. And the Pokemon theme certainly does that. And I assume you've picked out a few things. Why don't you tell us about a few of the things you noticed in there?
Yeah, so as you say, this song is almost the thesis statement of the show of the first season. It very quickly sums up who all our characters are, what they're about, what the conflict is, where their goals are. And it starts off very simply, Ash declaring, I want to be the very best, like no one ever was. That's his whole deal. He's going to catch and train Pokemon. He's going to travel across the land. He's going to learn things in return from the Pokemon. He's going to defend the world from Team Rocket and all sundry. So lyrically, it's very simple. It's not very poetic. It's not very metaphorical. It's just a declaration of what this show is about and who our main character is and what his world is. But it also does a lot of really beautiful things with harmonies and with instrumentation and like that opening electric guitar and the ba 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 that make you feel a lot of complex and big emotions, kind of a sense of grandeur to what otherwise is a very simple, like little boy following his dream narrative put forth by the lyrics, which is very cool, I think.
Yeah, and talking about the sort of perspective of this song, it's mostly written in first person. So I mentioned the term value proposition, which can be directed in a second person sense, sort of join the adventure. And there's a little bit, but most of this is, like you said, it's declarative. I want to be the very best. With courage, I will face, so on and so forth. So it's, it's about the main character, but it's also sort of goes into the ethos of the franchise. there about sort of self-determination and things like that. Um,
And friendship, come with me, arm in arm, we'll win the fight. Yeah.
yeah, so there is a little bit of us as well to it, so I think that is pretty well. Now, one thing that's interesting, you said we kind of said there are character names, but technically speaking, no, there really aren't. There are definitely no species names of Pokemon, and maybe that's where some people get the confusion that they see the yellow mouse character. Oh, that's Pokemon. No, that is a Pokemon called Pikachu. It is, but there are no species names at all in this theme song. Plenty of them appear in the intro, and of course in the show itself. But I found that kind of interesting. What do you think of that, Anne?
I mean, compared to every Japanese opening that tries to cram in as many Pokemon names and puns upon those Pokemon names as possible, it's a choice. um, but I think it speaks to the fact that we weren't as familiar with the game or the show at the time, that like that wouldn't have been as fun, I think, for us viewers it to do. So whereas I think later seasons, maybe it doesn't feel like a thing the English version does as much. Some theme songs, opening themes, try to cram in like names of attacks and things. I think later seasons kind of can get away with that because we all kind of know what we're watching. We know what we're about, so you can have a little fun and play on words. But I think I can see why that choice was not made for this particular theme.
It also might be because, at the same time, and it got a full version first, they were probably working on the English Poke Rap, which has, I think there's actually
Yes.
one or two missing, but it has tons of Pokemon species names in there, in that song. So maybe this was supposed to be kind of a counterpoint to that in some effect, not to overwhelm it. I mean, like if we're comparing this to the Japanese anime opening theme, Aim to
Mm.
be a Pokemon Master, I'm not sure. Maybe sometime we'll do an equivalent discussion about that. They haven't experimented quite as much, I feel, there. But in any case, I know at one point during the intro, this scene is cut for kind of obvious reasons. It goes through like a very brief smattering of Pokemon species names in part of that intro where it displays a bunch of them in rapid succession. And nothing like that in this one verbally or stuff like that. But I guess the one other thing I kind of wanted to mention is we talked going throughout all this. There is a very much a positivity, a can-do attitude, which I think is another thing that makes folks gravitate towards it. Well, the show does not require, and the anime in general does not require super close attention all the time. It's not expecting you to necessarily just lean back. It's sort of like the fact that this is based on an interactive medium, video games. That there is definitely a makes it I guess kind of appropriate that there is a bit of a join along quality to this. Does that make sense, Anne?
I guess so. Yeah, I was kind of interested that you said that it has a kind of a positive can do, because lyrically you're absolutely right, and yet the music is so dramatic and like minor chords and um just intervals that like create like dissonance and resolve and things. So it's like it's a very interesting juxtaposition that this is, yeah, a very positive like can do song that also like presents itself as being almost not positive song. Like if you change the lyrics, this could be a very sad and tragic, dramatic song, or a very angry song or something. Just with its instrumentation and its chord progressions and the like. So I kind of found that very interesting. That those two factors work very well together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we could say a lot more about the lyrics, but I think we'll be sort of peppering that in with our various versions that we're talking about. We're going to go in chronological order, so we've alluded to it a little bit here. But of course, the original version of this is the season one version, which is expanded upon on the version on the To Be a Master album. This is performed by Jason Page. I know he did a lot of commercial work. He's still around and still actually does cover versions and whatnot of this, and did put out a newish version for, spoiler alert, when Ash wins the World Coronation Ceremony of his own there. I was reading a book recently called Monster Kids that sort of has a bunch of research and stuff, and this is one of the folks the author interviewed, and I think Jason described this as somewhere between Michael Jackson and Bon Jovi. I think that's pretty fair to say this is sort of an, like, 80s-ish. Yeah, I mean, it's the late 90s, so it is kind of a throwback anthem that kind of goes in there. And I think that kind of reflects in the instrumentation and structure and stuff. And do you kind of agree with that or have your own opinion?
I do agree. Like I do see a connection, a through line between Bon Jovi to this song, and it makes sense because all the people, it's a 90s track, but all the people making professional music in the 90s were around and inspired by the 80s. So it makes, in the same way that our clothes tend to bleed through the decades, it makes sense that our music also does too.
And one interesting thing about really actually all four versions that we're going to talk about here, is that they all have some sort of visual information, which is, I guess, since they're, an intro to a TV show or movie is not totally unsurprising, or not totally surprising. But we definitely need to talk a little bit about the opening sequence. Now, it is adapted from the opening sequence used in the Japanese version, although it adds some scenes, removes others, uses some stuff from actual episodes. Talking about the 80s part of it, music videos have been around a long time. Probably since not long after. There were some short films that were effectively music videos, I'm sure, in like the 1930s. But I do think, having seen some of the Japanese openings, visually, that the Western ones tend to be edited a bit tighter and a bit more like a music video. And I think that goes back a ways. I think like one of the first openings that was kind of like that, at least that I remember, by virtue of my age, I guess, is like the original '87 Ninja Turtles opening, which is very much designed to look like a music video with transitions and stuff like that. But in any case, what do you sort of think of the editing of the footage to the song as we see in the season one opening?
To be honest, I don't love it as much as I do certain other seasons and songs. I think they make a couple really good choices to go with the song, the Pokemon theme as it presents itself, particularly the first like few seconds where it's like that. Dun, 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 dun. So opening with Mew and the light on Ash's face and the stadium and all that, like those are some very good choices. But overall, like won't say I'm too terribly impressed one way or the other by it. But again, it is a different time, and in the same way, it's edited differently from the Japanese version, which is also again a different musical sensibility, to a different music video sensibility, a different opening theme sensibility of how they do things and what audiences respond to. So it's like, I don't want to say it's less good than other seasons, just that I personally don't respond to it as well as certain other seasons.
Well, that's an interesting thing to say there.
I mean, if we want to someday do an episode on our favorite Pokemon opening music videos, like I have some opinions, but yeah, like this particular one does not make my top list. It just doesn't speak to me, the editing, as much as certain others.
I suppose but you can definitely
first,
tell,
like 5 seconds, ace.
Well, I mean, that's where you got to hook your audience, so you always want to make sure
right, yeah.
In any sort of video stuff there, you usually want your beginning and your end to be extra memorable. But considering that they couldn't really create anything in the way of new footage other than what was in the original Japanese intro, plus some stuff from various episodes, I think I have a little more positive impression of this, and I think they did a extremely good job. I do kind of wish, obviously, there was a full version once they put the full version out, but they didn't really have a vehicle for that, I suppose, until much more recently. So it would have been nice if they had. I do kind of wish they had done that. Maybe when they remastered the first 50 some episodes in HD, I think would have been a good thing there. Kind of similar to what they did with the look back arc that's coming at the end of Journeys. It's as we're recording this, it's already started airing in Canada and it's probably coming to the U.S. soon-ish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might have made a good DVD extra or something. But you do bring up a good point, which is that the Japanese version, the US version, Italian version, etc., like are operating under different parameters. The Japanese version can create their own footage for each theme song unique to that theme song, which is great for AMV people. But the US cannot do that. It is limited to anything that is already created. So that is a good point to bring up when people are evaluating these things.
Yeah, just to remind the folks at home, it wasn't until about season 11 or 12 that Italy started using the Western, an Italian version of the Western themes that they would, prior to that, just actually kind of create their own, many of which are worth checking out, but obviously not part of this discussion. But I did want to note that for the folks at home. Now, if I had maybe one criticism about this particular version, when you get to the To Be a Master version, the bridge is maybe not the most interesting part of the song. It's Jason repeatedly saying, gotta get them all several times. And I think there are other versions of the song that do more interesting stuff with that portion of it. We'll be bringing that up as they come along, but I wanted to sort of set that seed. I don't know, Anne, if that was something you also felt about or why. It's not bad or anything like that, but...
Right. Yeah, like, again, I don't have any particular thoughts of disappointment on this particular track in the bridge section, but I do agree with you. I have nothing particular to say about it, whereas other versions of this song, I do have things to say about the bridge and how they took that section. So,
all right. Well, let's go on to probably in terms of stature, the second most popular version. This is from obviously the dub of Pokemon the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. That also has an opening sequence, and if you look historically, I think they actually were thinking about putting a different song in there, but instead they decided to do a rearranged version of the first season theme. It's performed by Billy Crawford. It was arranged by Neil Jason, and we do talk about that version a little bit when I interviewed him a number of years ago. Billy Crawford, I don't know, he kind of disappeared a little bit. He's still around, as far as I know, but I'm not sure he's done too much significant or too much that's been world-renowned lately. I think he moved back to his native Philippines at some point. But as far as this version, it goes for a very different set of instrumentation. It is, I guess, certainly more, in some ways, certainly more normal, has a lot more synth work in it. Were those things you noticed here?
So here, unfortunately, this is a track that I like a lot, but not in the sense, but not for anything it does, if that makes sense. It's a track that I can tell the difference between this and the TV version side by side very easily, but I don't feel it does anything different. It doesn't do a lot differently enough that I care. It's kind of like I listen to it and I recognize like, oh, this is not the TV version. But like in some ways it feels very much like a karaoke track or something. Like it's a different voice, slightly different instrumentation, but it feels very much the same vein, even though I can spot the differences. So I kind of have weird feelings on this one because I do very much like it. It's a great arrangement. But it's not like new and different and creative enough for me to really be like, I I like this one. I'm keeping it in my playlist for XYZ reasons. It's more like just I acknowledge that it's different and it's there.
Well, let's see. Before we move,
Sorry. I don't love this one as much.
well, before we move on, I wanted to acknowledge a few folks in our chat room. We have Kale and Titanium. Titanium is mentioning, I think it's about the To Be a Pokemon Master arc. I think is supposed to come out to Netflix in September, a few weeks after we're recording this. But I wanted to say thank you very much for coming out here. If you have anything to add, please do that, and we'll try and work it into our discussion. But going back to responding to your thing there. Well, I'll admit that this one is, I mean, it definitely wants to be recognizable but different. I think I tend to enjoy it more for what's in it maybe than you do. I do also think that despite the Pokemon the First Movie soundtrack being a double platinum album, that this is probably still culturally subservient to the TV show version / To Be a Master version. But I think I have a little higher opinion of it than you. Going back to that bridge discussion we have, I think this one has a more interesting bridge than the To Be a Master version. I also wanted to talk about sort of its integration with the opening sequence there. Now, we had talked a little bit about this in our discussion a couple years ago of Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, since it uses a sort of rework-ish version of this song. But it doesn't make as many integrations and tight stuff. When I interviewed Neil Jason, he sort of explained that how when they would make edits to the movie, to that opening sequence there, they would have to sort of adjust the music a little bit because it sounds like they were being developed, like they were being edited kind of in parallel there or something like that. It's a little hard. I have to re-listen to it to get the full story again. But like in the actual movie, they work in timing so that like the song is in a certain place, gets into like the second verse just as the pirate guy is throwing out his Pokeball there, like for Machamp, throwing that one out there. And there's other stuff where they leave a little bit of stuff for Ash to say something, which, from my understanding, if I'm correct, it's not in the remake, but it's also not like in the '98 Japanese version. We'd see Ash, after his Pokemon win each of their little battles within the opening sequence, sort of, giving them a hug or whatever, but he doesn't actually really say anything. And in the English dub version in '99, they do try to squeeze that in there.
Yeah, his mouth is moving, but you don't really hear what he's saying. Yeah.
I do wonder, just from a storytelling perspective, I do wonder if that was the dub trying to expand the daylight between that opening battle scene and the gradually morally declining battles we see in the rest of the movie. Just wanted to kind of point that out there as a possible reason, but it does make it feel. But going back to what I said about the opening sequence for the TV show for not just the first season, but in particular the first season, is that there is a certain tightness there, which is, I think, a really neat effect that, to be honest, most of the other ones, they haven't been able to sort of achieve that, probably due to time constraints and whatnot, with the various theme songs. But getting it to go with the opening sequence quite that tightly.
But they did a very good job on that. Just kind of, fitting it to the space it needed to be in for the best impact.
Yeah, and like I said, something that the remake version, the Mewtwo mix in the CGI remake, I don't know if they had time constraints or what there, but that doesn't do to the same degree, or if it was just so different or whatever. There's a lot of, I'm sure, inside baseball or whatever with that remake movie that would shed light on a lot of things. Anything else you wanted to say about this particular version, Anne?
I mean, as you say, the bridge, like I it like the I would say the TV show theme is so iconic, like it's burned into my brain, those few opening bars. But the bridge of this song is the one I remember the most of this particular track. And when I think of the bridge of the Pokemon theme, I actually do my mind kind of goes here first because it does kind of build upon what was already there and elevate it. It's the one part of this track that I really feel kind of deserves some special notice.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure if that was a super conscious decision or what there, but definitely something that sets itself apart in terms of structure there.
Mm.
All right. Well, we're going to fast forward a long ways here. If you're curious about whether we're going to talk about Born to Be a Winner, which is sort of in this category, but sort of not, that's likely going to be a post discussion that we're going to toss in after the outro. But let's head into Generation 6. So you'd hear this song every now and again come up. But in the the first XY season, they did do a sort of remake. It appears in the TV show, but also in the Diancie and the Cocoon of Destruction movie as the intro theme there. This is the version XY. Now this is, excuse me, again, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is performed by Ben Dixon and the Sad Truth, who worked on a number of songs in that area, and I think still occasionally do stuff, although for the last couple seasons of Journeys and whatnot, they've brought in sort of some guest artists off and on through that, so we haven't heard as much from them specifically. This is the beginning of the Ed Goldthorpe era and such, so this is apparently an acquaintance of his. One thing we'll say, well, this is a guitar-based track much like the first season TV version. It does have a different vibe. The guitar groove at the start is definitely different. I have some thoughts on it, but Anne, I figured I'd give you the opportunity to get the sort of the first word on it, I guess.
Yeah, well, this is a track that does something that I really love, which is they really put their own spin on it in a way that not a lot of covers of the Pokemon theme do. Because most covers of the Pokemon theme start off with that one note and, everything kind of underneath it, that da. This one starts out with just a guitar riff. If the original theme is Bon Jovi, this kind of has more of a poppy, softer rock to it, but the guitars and the drums are making a beat, and then the lyrics come in, and then you're listening to the Pokemon theme. And I think that's very fascinating that they do this song in their style. It is recognizable as the Pokemon theme, but not necessarily with that super iconic start, which I think is both interesting because I love to hear people try new and different things, but also because it's almost impossible not to judge when you hear that first note, that version against everything you remember from your childhood, just because it is so iconic. So I think it's a clever thing to try to circumvent that altogether and just start on a completely different note, a completely different feel.
Yeah, I wrote down that I think this has like a more confident vibe to it. Not that the first one doesn't. The first one, season one, is more of a proclamation. This is more of a like I think it is more appropriate this version to come kind of in the middle of the Ash Ketchum era of the anime, because he hasn't become the very best yet at this point, but he seems to be making progress in his arc there, and I think this has a little more confidence to it in a different way. Like the first season is more of I believe I can, and this is more of I'm getting there. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, like when you talk about confidence, yeah, the first season opening kind of has the confidence of like who am nothing but a speck in the universe, am gonna like Don Quixote tilt at this windmill, challenge the gods confidence. Like I'm nowhere near my goal, but I'm going for it and I want everyone to know about it. This almost has more of the confidence of like a garage band that is used to playing gigs. And it's like, yeah, they're not like playing Madison Square Gardens, but like we're confident, we're good at our job kind of energy. I don't know. But as you say, it kind of fits more of Ash's middle journey where he's like, I know what I'm doing now. And I'm not a hot mess. I don't suck. But I am not the very best, like no one ever was yet, but I'm going to be.
Yeah, so I think I don't know if that was the exact intention or if they just wanted to make sure they did something that sounded distinct from the first season version, but either way, I think it definitely works on that level. Now we had mentioned Diancie and the Cocoon of Destruction. The XY movies are, I mean, I have said there's a clear commercial winner, and that's Hoopa and the Clash of Ages, but none of them I think are regarded massively highly. I kind of don't remember exactly. I think this is another one of those exploring a town intro sequences for this particular movie. They're exploring one of those. So there are, if you listen to the album version of this, which is on the Pokemon Movies Music Collection that was released back in like 2017 or whatever, around the time I Choose You came out, there are little flourishes and stuff that I think are supposed to tie into stuff happening in that intro, which unfortunately I did not get a chance to rewatch for this one. But again, another piece, like these are always going to be combined with some sort of visual media. All the versions we're discussing here, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure. Like this is an interestingly different version, but I'm not sure I have too much else to say about it that I haven't already. And anything you wanted to add here?
Just that it's interesting that they went their own way, that it's its own unique thing, different than any other of the other two versions we've talked about so far. Kind of it like it feels like they covered it in their own style, and I appreciate it for that.
All right. Well, of the four main versions we're going to talk about here, we have one more. This is Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions. And here it's specifically referred to in like the set list and on the screen that they have there as Gotta Catch 'Em All, likely to differentiate it from the Pokemon game theme, which we probably will do an episode comparing some of the major versions of that at some point, because I think that's a really neat discussion. But in any case, if you're not familiar with this was a concert series that ran from 2014 to about 2016, 2017. I'm trying to remember exactly. Like, I was looking it up. I don't remember exactly when the last show in the series was. Now, Anna's at a bit of a disadvantage. She did not make it to any of the shows for this. I was able to make it to two. I made it to one in D.C. They debuted it at the World Championships that year in DC. So I managed to get a ticket to one of those and got to watch the debut performance that weekend, which was a lot of fun. But if you do need to look this version up, well, there's no official soundtrack release of this concert series. You can, we'll just say, find versions of it on there. But this was, performed by whatever orchestra was at the concert you might have gone to. But it was, like I said, arranged by Chad Seiter and Jerome Moore. I probably messed up Chad's last name there, but and it comes across a little different each time. A, because of course it's being performed live, but also if you were at the DC performance, and I think one or two of the others, they had a live singer for this. Although they did encourage the audience to sing along. And it's not just, well, and since this was kind of new to you, although you might have seen it before, what was your sort of impression of this?
Yeah, like I loved it. I mean, it's hard not to love a symphonic version of a song you love. But I just felt they perfectly captured the emotions you feel with their stringed instruments and their percussion and the way, the brass is taking over some of the lyric lines. Like it like everything I felt while watching the show and that theme, I felt was translated very well musically, and I could feel my excitement grow. And to be fair, my experience was somewhat colored by the fact that the audience in the video I was watching was totally singing along, as I think I would have too. But I don't think that took away from it either. Like, if they did release an album, I almost want them to release a live version of everybody singing. Um, but yeah, like, I just found it so fascinating, like which instruments they choose to use at which points, and to convey this sound and that feeling. And I felt like they did such a very good job of translating this song in a way that was both nostalgic, but also made me feel a bunch of new things.
And going into some of that, I mean, obviously, orchestras tend to play, music with wide-ranging and dynamics. As opposed to this theme, which typically is very loud, at least within the confines of whatever sound system it's going through, or whatever, sort of, I should say, whatever medium it's going through. But they do have some dynamic stuff, some drums. There's a little bit, I think, of synth instruments in there, at least in the versions I listened to. And yeah, they have a video footage, although I think it would have done them a little bit of good if they had superimposed the lyrics on there. It's kind of funny when the second verse started. It's like only certain parts of it, like every challenge along the way. That's right. I mean, that doesn't get drilled into you quite as much. So
No.
so your quality, not just because of they may or may not have had a vocal singer, but depending on your audience, and I think they had. I listened to a couple different versions. Now this Symphonic Evolutions from the schedule I looked at never performed in Japan. So there's not an alternate version, at least that I know of, that uses like Aim to be a Pokemon Master. Which is, I assume, what they would have done there. Perhaps not.
Right.
But I looked at a version from Mexico, and I don't know. I mean, I don't speak Spanish super well, but there they might have had some conflict because I'm sure some folks were singing like Achapalos Ya, the Spanish version, trying to sing that, and then probably some other folks were still belting out the English version. I don't know, but maybe that was one reason that audience
that kind of
seemed
adds
to be.
to the fun of it in a way.
I think that may have conflicted a bit. And maybe that was the audience seemed a little quieter there, but it may have just been where this unofficial video was being recorded from. But anyway you slice it, kind of a fun song. I didn't get a chance, we mentioned Italy. By this point they did, this was like the XY version was one of their first exposures officially to a localized Italian version of the song. It had been published in English there, I think, at some point, but in any case, sorry. I have a bit of a mucus issue it's a long story, but let's see here. But definitely something the crowd got into. One interesting thing about all the video footage, if I remember correctly, is from the more modern iterations of the anime post-dub switchover. That was probably easier. I don't know if at this point they had started remastering that first season to HD, so they may not have had access to that. And of course, all the modern stuff is in widescreen and stuff like that. So I think they may have, that may have been a bit of a limitation there. I don't know. Just kind of wanted to mention that. Any other thoughts on this version, though, Anne?
No, I do. I love it.
All right. Well, we're going to do a little bit of a wrap up, but first, there's a couple other versions we need to mention out there. At least a couple other pieces of Pokemon media that use this that we need to talk about. First of all, there's I Choose You, which its opening sequence is a fairly straight cover of the season 1 version, which for that movie makes sense, but we didn't really bring it up in full here because it's kind of the same. Now, the credits does have a solo piano version, which is kind of neat there. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very intimate and whatnot, as you expect from a solo piano piece, and a little more, not laid back isn't quite the right word there, but you kind of get the idea. Any quick comments on either of those?
I mean, I can see why they might not choose a solo piano as like the opening sequence of a movie, but I really do love that solo piano piece. Um, I just, again, it's something slightly different, slightly unique.
Yeah, and going back to the intro, that was one they've kind of reused that version in cases in some of the more modern media. Like I think it's in one of the music videos from Pokemon 25. It's I think the bassist used in the Masters 8 competition in the dub of that and so on. The other place where this song shows up kind of pretty prominently that I wanted to make sure we talked about is the both the movie itself and some of the promotion for it, but Detective Pikachu uses it. First of all, if you look at the second trailer, there's little notes here and there in the opening section before it gets to holding out for a hero. There's little notes from it there. And then it also appears twice at least in the film. It appears, I think, during the promo that I forget their names, but the Cliffords are recording for the parade. 20, 30 minutes in. And also it appears, well, there's a wonderful, I was not totally meant to be serious cover, a very sad cover, I guess, by Ryan Reynolds as Detective Pikachu towards the, towards the end of the second act or beginning of the third act or whatever, after he and Tim have sort of broken up for a bit. Which I think actually that scene inspired an actual like plush toy of some sort that was made in limited numbers. I don't know. What are your kind of thoughts on how this song was used in various ways in and around Detective Pikachu?
It makes sense to have it in like there are many options for how you could use it in the movie for how it could exist in that world as like commercial jingles, as like the theme of a Pokemon battle televised on TV, whatever. Like there are so many different ways you could use it. So I think it just makes sense to use riffs from that theme in the world, or like because it is so declarative, like use moments from the lyrics on signs and things like that. Like there are just so many options. So yeah, like it makes sense that they would use it that way. But poor Emo-Chew crying his way through the Pokemon theme. Like I would love that to be my ringtone, but I think it's so cute, so clever, great juxtaposition of humor to undercut the sadness. It perfect. I love it. No notes.
Yeah, whenever I've watched that movie with a theatrical audience, it's always gotten a pretty good reaction for that portion there. Movie also makes some decent uses of the Pokemon game theme as well. But I always like to say the marketing, if you look at the marketing for the Detective Pikachu movie, you can really tell that there were people who were thrilled to be able to work on that. Either, I don't know if they hired, like some of the folks had worked at like Kids WB back in the day, and it's like, finally we get to do this again. And I'm sure some of them had grown up with it by the time you get to the late 2010s when that movie comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But you can just tell from a lot of the who's that Pokemon marketing and all that fun stuff, and sort of the other things they did there, that they really were excited to be a part of that production and to be able to help put out and promote this movie.
Definitely.
All right, well, let's sort of wrap up our thoughts on here. I mean, like, we titled this "What's the Best Version?" and that's always going to be personal preference, so maybe a partial cop-out on that. I think, like, if you ask what their favorite version is, and in terms of cultural relevancy, that's pretty easily the Season 1 TV version / 2BM Master version, and I assume you pretty much agree with that one.
Yeah, like just again for recognizability, cultural reference, the fact that it is tied to, for many of us, our childhoods. And like, I don't think I've ever been at a con where that didn't play for some reason and everybody just started singing. Like even people who aren't, the diehard super fans, like everyone knows the words. Everyone remembers this song. Everyone feels something about this song in its original TV presentation. That said, I don't know if again, it's so subjective calling it the best, but I really love the XY take on it as well. So I think maybe it's got to shove up there for honorable mention, at least for myself personally.
Yeah. Well, so I did ask around a bit on this one, both locally and because we're recording this about a week after the 2023 Pokemon World Championships. I asked a few folks there, and I got kind of a similar-ish opinion that, like, yeah, in terms of cultural relevancy and the one I, grew up with, it's probably the first season TV version. Although, like I said, the Pokemon first movie soundtrack, double platinum album, so you'll see a lot that reference that version as well. I did talk to one person today who was really impressed by the orchestral version, which I am to a certain degree too. I think also some of that is like the social proof factor of that, which goes into really all these versions, but it kind of works out there. Sorry, let me rephrase that. And sort of gives them validation that way as well. It's also worth noting, I mean, part of this is because in a lot of markets, Western markets, I should say, the TV show debuted a few weeks before the games actually came out, Red and Blue. So this is, when we say this is the Pokemon theme or the English Pokemon theme, in some cases it is probably more resonant than the actual Pokemon game series theme, which is an interesting spot. Whereas I assume that's probably not really true for Aim to be a Pokemon Master.
I was going to say that would be a great question to like take to the road and ask people, because I think you're right. I think that's incredibly true of all of us in the West. I wouldn't know. But, I mean, you were the one who was there most recently, but that would be a great question to sort of pound the pavement and get the feeling of what people find more iconic there.
Yeah, but I mean, there are other video game franchises that have somewhat of a similar situation. I'm reminded of the Carmen Sandiego franchise, but part of that's that the original computer games for Carmen Sandiego did have some music in there, but obviously a lot of folks definitely remember the rockapella theme song from the game show. And to a lesser extent, the opening theme song from the cartoon, Where on Earth. Those have kind of supplanted most of what's from, pretty much everything that's from the games in that regard. But that was sort of more entering a more vacant space, I think. This is a case where, some of it is temporality, but it's an interesting discussion. What percentage of people, if you say Pokemon theme, do they assume you mean the theme from the TV show or the theme from the games? So that is a very interesting discussion. Not something you can say about a lot of, spin-off media. That something from that spin-off has become almost as iconic or even more iconic than its equivalent from the original media itself. That's extraordinarily rare. And I wanted to kind of point that out. But obviously, very important song, both within the franchise and within the musical and theme song lexicon of the world. So, and definitely something that, even though it has its own inspirations, has probably also inspired a number of other, kind of things in there.
Definitely. It's probably one of the more covered songs, not in an official capacity by the Pokemon Company, but like by bands, by pianists, by musicians. It's just something that the whole, over the whole world, has an impact.
Yeah, definitely something that's expanded, especially ever since the generation that grew up with it, the millennial generation, started getting, access to music production, and with the more open distribution platforms that we have now, like streaming services, and also, and before that, digital purchase platforms and stuff like that. Something we they kind of grew up at the right time for that as well. All right. Well, like I said, we're going to talk about at least one other song after the outro on this one as a bonus segment. But if you have any thoughts on any of the versions we discussed here or some of the other ones out there, again, this was a discussion of only official ones, but please do give us a comment. You can reach us via email, pokepress@gmail.com, on Twitter or X or whatever it's called by the time this goes out on the episode feed, at Pokepress. Or you can always leave a comment in one of these if you're watching it in video form. But
Mm-hmm.
in any case, I do have a little bit of feedback. It's a thread I was in, but although it's not actually on one of my videos. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's see. Did I get the right one? Oh, that's always fun. I can't tell which of these is which, unfortunately. Okay, this is the correct one. So this is a thread on a video. Speaking of songs that appear a lot in pop culture, there's the song by Smash Mouth called All Star, which I'm sure most of the folks at home are familiar with. It's appeared in a lot of movies over the years. And there's a video. This is on a video of a guy. I forget his channel name, unfortunately, but he looked at all the movies that have used it and sort of compared all their uses and all that fun stuff. It's probably actually most famous for a movie that came out a few years after the song called, maybe you've heard of it, Shrek. Uh, Apparently, thread starts out. There's someone posted that, hey, it was a temp song, but it fit the mood and they were able to clear it. So I pointed out, it's a bit of a risk given that the song had been used elsewhere, but it definitely works. A little bit of a back and forth with another person on that. I sort of had to follow that up with an explanation that basically it could be considered overused at that point. But, Shrek is definitely also resonant with the millennial audience that grew up with Pokemon. And so is this song, despite, we won't get into all the controversy that the band has gotten into in the last few years for various reasons. But, I don't know, like this. Have you seen any of the other movies that use All Star in them, Anne?
I mean, in I feel like I've seen it in so many things. I've seen it in, what is it, that Rat Race movie. I've seen it in Shrek. It was actually on, like, not just in Shrek the Third, but yeah, like Shrek. It was on the CD for the first Shrek. Like, it's been in so many things, I feel like. So it's like possibly overused, but at the same time, for that particular movie, it just made sense. So, like, fits the mood perfectly.
Yeah, I think the first two films it was actually in were contemporaneous with the song itself. It's associated closely with Mystery Men because there's a version that splices in footage of the band with footage from that film, which was more or less supposed to be a debut. But I think
Oh,
around the same time as when the Matthew Broderick Inspector Gadget movie, which also uses
yep.
it, came out around the same time. So that was sort of a double header there. It is a very good soundtrack song in that regard and has appeared numerous times. We'll see where that goes in the future. Um,
It's kind of like one of those songs like Careless Whisper or So Happy Together, where it's like you don't need a lot of the song, but a little bit of it just kind of takes the audience to a very specific place. So it's useful in a lot of movie soundtracks, I feel.
yeah, I guess one point of comparison I kind of wanted to make, there's a Pokemon song that very different in terms of tone and instrumentation and stuff, but feels like it could have fallen into a similar vein, is Flying Without Wings. From
Mm.
originally a single in Europe in '99, but of course is on the second movie soundtrack and is in the end credits there, hasn't gotten quite the same amount of views. Now I don't know if they're asking more money than Smash Mouth for that, and that's keeping it out of some places or what. But any idea why that song hasn't? I mean, that song we've talked about it during our disputed Pokemon songs episode, and that song is really malleable. And if you look at
Yeah.
some of the compilation albums and playlists that versions of that song show up in, and yet it doesn't seem to have shown up in as many films or TV shows as All Star has. Can you think of why
Yeah.
that might be? Was it maybe just that it wasn't as popular in America because it was never released? The Westlife version was never released as a single here, and thus maybe it wasn't as well known to American movie producers and stuff. Or what do you think
Entirely
there?
possible. Yeah, like um if the sync, the person in charge of sync licensing for a project never hears the track, then it can't make it into a movie. That's just the sad truth. So it's possible that, yeah, it just never got the traction in the US. So all the people in charge of finding songs to use in sync placements just never heard it, and thus it never got as much buzz, as much use, as much play. It also could be a money thing. I mean, nothing wrong with knowing what you're worth, but yeah, it's interesting to me because I do feel like that song could have fit so many things, and if it had kind of like just hit the right people in the right vein, like it could have had like an all-star type of quality. Who's to say why it didn't? It is definitely not too late. Everybody out there in sync licensing, if you want to make this a thing, like songs definitely find a second life. Just ask Kate Bush. So,
yeah. I mean, it's a couple interesting. Of course, there was the Ruben Studdard version a couple years later, which did very well. First, he performed it on American Idol, and also did. Pushed it as a radio single, which did pretty well on the charts there. So it's not like it's totally unknown, as just a song in the U.S. But I do kind of wonder about that. If it's, like I said, if being more popular in Europe is sort of a detriment with the movie studios being mostly based here in the U.S. I don't know. I will say, one of the writers on that, Steve Mack, I mean, that wasn't his. Well, he also wrote Blah, 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 I believe. He's listed as a co-writer. And he also co-wrote Celestial with Ed Sheeran. So he seems to. He managed to come back into Pokemon's orbit last year. So for what that's worth. But yeah, I was kind of wondering. You kind of got to wonder why certain songs keep popping up again and again, and others maybe not so much. But yeah, that was sort of the gist of what I wanted to accomplish with this discussion. Like I said, if you have any comments on this, you can reach us via email, a video comment, or on social media.
mm-hmm.
All right, so this episode was supposed to come in between generations 5 and 6, and it may or may not have. So I had forgotten that Pokemon Rumble U, the Wii U edition of Pokemon Rumble, is actually a 5th generation game. It came out before X and Y. However, I need to do some research on it because I know it reuses a lot of music from previous Umbrella Pokemon games, and I don't think there's all that much new in it. I don't know if we can get a full discussion, a partial discussion, or not really a discussion out of it. The other alternative, the actual first Gen 6 Pokemon game, side game that we would end up discussing would be Pokemon Battle Trozei. So that was a Genius Sonori developed game, and that is a fair amount of new music, and we should have some material there. So one of those will be at least part of our next episode. So until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. Okay, so yes. So yeah, we have the chat in there. So yeah, so we're going to do a little post-discussion about a song that we couldn't really decide if it did or did not fit in, which is Born to be a Winner from the 4th season. So we'll leave. I don't think that'll be a very long discussion. We also have something after that. We do have a little bit of a slideshow that I meant to show at the beginning of this presentation. But because we had so many technical issues, I won't get right into the actual discussion. So we'll do that afterwards. But so just leave a little bit of a pause. Let's see, how are we doing on there? Yeah, obviously it's going to be a very long recording, but oh well. So I will do a little intro, and we'll kind of go from there. All right, well, there was a song that we weren't sure if it really fit in here or really didn't, because it is, to a degree, based on the English Pokémon theme, but to a degree it is also its own thing. And that is Born to be a Winner. So this is a song from the 4th season, Johto League Champions, if memory serves me. And it's also, I believe, the first Pokemon song performed by David Rolfe, who would go on to do, he would do all, I believe, the opening theme for the rest of the Four Kids era, so up through season 8. So the way this one starts off, there's, well, it depends if you're talking about the TV version or the movie version from the Celebi movie. But basically, it starts off with some of the lyrics there, but then it goes into, my whole life has led to this, talent or challenge or whatever it is to test my skill. So it goes in a somewhat different direction from there. I don't know, Anne, what are your thoughts about this song in general?
I love it a lot, but one of the things I love most about it is kind of the same thing I love about XY, is it starts and it's kind of like you have that same feeling of, oh, this is the Pokemon theme, because it doesn't start out in that simple way you would expect. It's different music with the lyrics on top that are the same. And then it builds upon what the Pokemon theme started. So when it, kind of, my whole life has led to this. And again, it just kind of builds off of what the theme established into something new, which is such a beautiful illustration of what the show is doing in Johto, where it's building off of Ash's original journey and experiences and the first generation, second generation, original series stories and experience and their legacy, if you will, and building upon that and just bridging it off into something new as it goes off into kind of the tail end of that series, which will become the bridge into Hoenn. So I love it so much. It's so emotional for me. I know every word. I love it.
Yeah, I definitely like both the TV and the movie version of this song. Now, as for why they did this, well, you might actually have to ask the Japanese side of that, because they actually brought back Aim to be a Pokemon Master for the 4th season of the TV show there as well. So this was, to a degree, I think this was the dub following that lead. Now, I kind of wonder if in hindsight this seems a little bit premature, although I guess you could say that about the XY version. I'm not sure, since the series, it seems kind of early to bring that back when the series goes on longer. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, it works well both as the opening sequence song and then also in the opening to Celebi, A Timeless Encounter, where Ash is yet again doing a battling intro where and then he realizes he has to catch like a boat, I believe it is, that is about to leave with Brock and Misty on it. And at the end he has to, come in there. And there they had the second verse, which is actually much closer every challenge along the way. I believe it is almost word for word the same as the second verse of the season 1 theme there. And then it goes back and, born to be a winner, born to be. So I like what that song does. And I think it's one of the best things. I don't think Celebi is a terrible movie, but I think it's not one of the most well regarded ones either. Kind of unfortunately. Going back to the TV version, there's that weird little sound in there that I want to call it the womp 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 that goes in there. There's some interesting like sound effects and other stuff that they do with this, presumably to stay quote unquote up with the times as the series was sort of moving. It was sort of at this point going through its decline phase from the original before it would start to recover, I think, during Diamond and Pearl a bit. That's a discussion for another day as to when and how that happened. Yeah, I'm not sure I have a ton else to say. Anne, can you think of any other like near misses that are out there in there? I mean, I'm just not entirely sure.
What do you mean by near misses exactly?
Things that are clearly have elements of the Pokemon theme in there, but are also musically their own thing. Like we mentioned the second Detective Pikachu trailer, which has a few notes in the beginning from it, but I don't think that quite fits into the same category. I mean, the phrase "gotta catch 'em all" or like "no one ever was" shows up a few places here and there, like in that Super Bowl ad they did in 2016. But I'm trying to think of anything else musically that sort of works like that isn't more or less just a cover, that sort of straddles that line the way Born to be a Winner does. And I don't know that there really is anything. I mean, they did try to put out, I guess we should mention this, a month or two before we recorded this, they put out this weird combination between Aim to be a Pokemon Master and Gotta Catch 'Em All, like mixed together. And to be honest, I don't think it worked very well. I think it was just they just like I don't know what I would have done in that particular case, but I think the result was hard to listen to be quite honest.
Yeah, I haven't heard it, but I can imagine there's not a lot of great ways that could go. I'm sure there's one out there somewhere, but I can't think of it.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's the closest thing I can think of, and still that's a very, very different deal there.
Yeah, I feel like I want to be the very best like no one ever was kind of creeps into a lot of things in the Pokemon franchise that like off the top of my head I can't think of anything where it's as clearly defined as Born to be a Winner is. That like this is what we're doing. Like this is a what's it called officially, a derivative work.
Yeah, that's
kind of it's not a cover, but or a parody, but
yeah, it borrows some elements, and so yeah, I'm not sure exactly. There's too much else. There's always stuff that brings in little bits of an element in there. Even in non-Pokemon media, there's a definite evidence to like travel across the land in one of the Pokemon likes that I've played recently, Cassette Beasts. Makes a sly little reference to the Pokemon theme song in there, but yeah, so I don't know if there are other offshoots. Please do let us know. But I'm struggling to think of anything that is quite in the same category.
Mm.
All right, well I think that covers it for our thing. I figured I guess I should have realized that would be a pretty short end segment. Let me go ahead and stop our recordings here so that we can finally terminate those. Thank you to everyone who's been so patient. But like I said, we do have a little bit more. So those of you who were here last time when we discussed Gates to Infinity will know that one of our feedback things, I got into a discussion on Twitter with a guy who had just seen the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, and to be fair, there are some things that the movie does decently. Overall, I think it is very mediocre, and that's probably because they ran out of time/money to do everything they wanted, both in the original Japanese production of the movie and also in the localization. I'm sure it was quite difficult in a lot of ways. We had sort of alluded to it earlier with how the opening sequence doesn't have some of those tighter integrations in the remake that were added in the 99 dub. So that's a thing. But he had talked about, and this is something I'm sure a lot of folks have thought about, what if they did a CGI remake of The Power of One? And I think not just in terms of CGI, there's a lot of stuff they want to improve there, especially the music, because I think there's some complaints people had about the first movie remake that would be even louder if it didn't have some of the vocal songs and whatnot in there, and score elements would be even louder in a remake. So especially if they're doing it theatrically. But what I made out of that is I've been using Stable Diffusion, which is an image generation platform, an AI-based one, to transform screenshots from various parts of the Pokemon franchise into other art styles. I did it a little bit with the TCG, creating TCG versions of some other musicians. There's a whole story behind that. I also did some stuff from Pokemon Masters, creating live-action versions of some of those characters. And last time, if you were here, I showed a CGI-ification of a screenshot from The Power of One. I've got more of those. I also did some retouching on a bunch of them. So if you saw this short I put out, I think back in July, you might have seen these already, but I wanted to get some thoughts from Anne on this. So let me go ahead and present the screen here, if I can find the correct window. Okay, only one slideshow right now. So we were originally going to show this at the beginning of the presentation, but because we had all those technical issues, we decided to move it to the end here. But I still want to get Anne's sort of take on some of this stuff.
Yes, bring on the AI.
Yeah. All right, so this was basically a bunch of, I'm trying to be as honest as possible about these. I did not create these totally from scratch. What I in These are transformed versions of images. So I didn't from the anime. I used a model that's based on largely stuff from modern CGI Disney movies. But I did train my own embedding based on a bunch of screenshots from Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. So I have 5 different things here. This is not really a guessing game because I think it's pretty easy to tell from these pictures which movie they're based on. This is more of a compare and contrast thing. So let's see. So you saw more or less this one. I made a few Photoshop edits to get it to be a little more accurate color-wise to what it is. But this is I'm sure you can guess, this is our Pokemon 2000, The Power of One CGI-ification screenshot here
Right,
with
yeah.
Articuno, Moltres, and you can see just a little bit of Zapdos against the cloudy sky there. Um, I think the main changes I made since the last time you saw it is I fixed a little bit of Articuno's head and fixed its eye color and belly color to be closer to its correct colors in there, and also its beak, I think. So mostly that was what I fixed with a lot of these. I got the colors kind of close, but it would never get them all correct. Just to review, here's the actual screenshot. So like I said, this is not a from-scratch creation. This is taking screenshots from the movies and transforming them using some keywords and models and embeddings and stuff. Overall, I think this one turned out pretty well as a proof of concept. Moltres looks more like just fire and all that stuff. It would probably look a little bit different. I think Articuno has like in one of those Pokemon Kids videos on that channel, there's an official version of Articuno in there. But the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution art style has been used in a few other things since, but nothing on that scale, obviously. So we had this. Any new thoughts on this particular one, Anne?
Nothing new to say. Just again, it's a great proof of concept. Like, and again, the colors, red and blue work, or orange and blue rather, work really well together on the color wheel. Who knew?
Yeah, so I think this one turned out fairly well. Like I said, I'd actually creating the models from scratch and animating them, that's a whole nother ball of wax. But this is a lot easier for me than trying to commission someone to make a mock-up here. It would take way more time and stuff. So for a thing like this, that's one reason I did it this way with AI. I also, as you may notice, watermark these pretty heavily just so that no one tries to pass these off as an actual remake in progress. All right. Okay, I'm sure you can tell
Oh,
which movie
how
this is.
fun.
This is, of course,
Yes.
Pokemon Heroes, the Latios and Latios movie. This is the scene from sort of near the climax of the movie where Latios is pulling Ash on his chariot towards the museum and whatever. I did try to kind of, I don't know how intentionally slash unintentionally avoid having scenes like cropping. I cropped a lot of these pictures so you can't see the people in them because that was one of the things about Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution that people criticize. And I don't claim that these are all the exact same art style in there. You get varying degrees in here with this process. But anyway, here's the original screenshot. A fair bit darker in this one. But you can
Hmm.
still see the correlation here.
Yeah, for a daylight
Um,
shot, I really love that of Latias.
yeah, it's definitely earlier and like there's still some daylight. I think it's near probably, it's not super bright out. You can sort of see stuff on the water there. So yeah, it took a little while. Unfortunately, it's like Latias's arm on there didn't get like it had some trouble with figuring out where certain things begin and end, but that was kind of the result there.
Hmm.
All right, I think you can figure this one out. No, like I said, these
That
should
is
all be
definitely a
fairly
Lucario.
obvious. Definitely Lucario from Lucario and the Mystery Mew. Now, for some reason, I kept telling it to leave the eyes closed, and it kept opening them up. The other thing it kept messing up is this little spike on its chest. It kept trying to interpret that as a mouth slash tongue, and I could see how it could kind of make that mistake. It's um, a little bit here, and I had trouble with a little bit of the colors. Like the insides of its ears are supposed to be very dark, and they didn't quite turn out that way. But
Hmm.
this one I think maybe comes the closest to like the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution art style there in terms
Indeed.
of that movie, in terms of what you might get. And even though it isn't as popular a movie as say 2000, um, I do think that this might be one they revisit in some form at some point. Um,
I'm here for it. I love that
Like I could
movie.
see this as a candidate for if they want to do another CGI remake. Part of me kind of hopes they do an original CGI movie, maybe based on Mystery Dungeon at
Right,
some point. But I think
right.
that would be a pretty good venture there. But you can sort of see here, this is the one where
Yeah.
Lucario was kneeling in front of the queen or whatever it is.
Hmm.
I think it did a pretty
And
good job
constantly
there.
vigilant.
Okay. Um,
Oh, you could do some cool things with CGI and Darkrai. I'm just,
yeah, this is obviously the rise of Darkrai. This one came up, like I said, each of these resulted in a somewhat different artistic style, despite my use of the same model and the same embedding, and then just adding some more keywords. Um, but
well,
you can sort of see the
each Pokemon movie has a slightly different artistic style,
yeah.
to be
Yeah, some
fair.
of that is
Like,
obviously them going from cell-based to digital animation over the course of the first
yeah.
10 or so movies. Um, so that's kind of a factor there. But this one does look different than some of the other ones out there that we've shown so
Hmm.
far. Like you get a little different result here. Um, this one I had to do some photoshopping to sort of fix, like it make things look convex that were convex and concave that were concave, particularly on the little collar thing that Darkrai
Hmm.
has, and getting like the eye color correct and stuff like that to get it a little closer to what you see here with the blue eye. Kind of hard to see here, but I did
Yeah.
have to recolor that. Um,
Something about it that looks a little Minecrafty too, in
depending on
certain
where, I mean,
areas.
they don't have to totally, if they do another CGI remake, they don't have to totally stick with the general consensus is they need to make some real improvements over Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, but they don't need to be totally. They can take I think a certain level of departure from it if they want to.
Right, yeah, for
If they
sure.
decide that works better. All right, and this one should be fairly
Hey,
obvious.
yeah,
This
sure.
is this is Zoroark. Again, we got a little bit of a different style here. This is where it's perched on top of that building towards the end of the movie, I think it is. This one I had to fill in a lot of its like mane or whatever it is. I had to work through that myself. So if that looks a little inconsistent with the rest of it, that's probably why.
I like the
And I
lighting
try to get
play
some
in
of the
this
other
one.
colors to be closer, but you can definitely tell there's some offness here at the so.
But
But
the
this gives you
striking aspect of the colors is very evocative, again, as a proof of concept. Like this tells a producer something.
yeah. So I didn't do anything newer than fourth generation on this, in part because I don't. Well, I must have some of those around somewhere. Um, maybe I wasn't as moved by some of the more recent movies. I don't know. But in any case, of these like five different ones here, first of all, which if you had to like if you were making a business decision, okay, which of these movies do we remake to get the most return on investment, based on first of all what we like all, expected audience and all that fun stuff. What would you which of these would you pick?
Okay, well, obviously this one we're looking at now, Power of One, looks visually stunning. The color palette works really good together. I think the models work really well for what we're trying to do. So that's one. Um,
It's also
I
like
then
all the go ahead.
sorry. After that, I think it's a bit of a tie between the Zoroark one and Latias, because again, for this same reasons, like the Latias one, it actually looks really crisp and very nice. And then the Zoroark one, again, the lighting and is just very evocative of mood. I can get a sense of the story we're trying to tell, and if that's kind of our lighting design and our color palette going forward, like I can see a lot of potential there. Um, it's like I want to say the Darkrai one as well, but that's more because I know the story of Darkrai and I also know what CGI can do. That particular image, I don't know, conveys everything that I'm thinking in my mind. So maybe a producer who's not as familiar with Pokemon may not
Yeah, yeah.
respond as well to it. It's hard to say.
Darkrai has a very fluid appearance that isn't really reflected. A because this is a still image,
Right.
and a few other things. But yeah,
Right. It's not like
so
you actually went and modeled this, because I'm sure you would do it very differently if such a thing.
if I
But
did that or hired someone more likely to do
right.
that, yeah, which would have taken
So
forever. So as a proof of concept, If you're wondering,
Yeah,
could they do
there's
this
a
for
lot of
each
good
frame
here
of
for
the movie
that.
and publish it out? In theory, yes, but in terms of like a sellable product, probably not.
Mm.
Like commercially, I mean, 2000 Power of One is like the second most popular of the animated films, commercially speaking. Um,
Yeah, and like
like
again,
it has
just
the most. Like
visually,
if you're going based on name recognition, that's kind of the one you want to do there. And especially the other, I mean, there's other externalities here, like because the legendary birds are used as the mascots of the teams in Pokemon Go, the cross marketing opportunities there are insane. I can
right,
only begin to
brand
think what they
visibility,
would,
and
what Niantic would, working together. I mean, they always work together with the Pokemon Company because but you know what I mean to promote this
yeah,
movie, like as they have done. Like I'm trying to think the first one they really did, if it was Detective Pikachu or something before that, for Pokemon Go cross promotion. Um, but this definitely gives me, even though like I said, I would have done Moltres to look much more recognizable rather than sort of a glowing fire thing, I
hmm
would have modeled that differently. I did when I gave it keywords. I did say use the word phoenix and stuff. Um, and obviously the Latios movie. I mean, they revisited that recently, and that was sort of the other musical story we missed is that the dub version of it. And I'm not happy about it not using the theme from the fifth movie, but I can think of a number of things working against that as to why it didn't when they brought it over. So I'm not totally surprised. Um, and there may well have been some advocates. It's like I said, I won't go into all that. But I think this would certainly be a fun place if I were a CGI designer. I mean, it was like talking about all the sets and stuff. Going back to Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, I think they purposely tried to sort of limit the number of sets they had to build, and that's probably why we didn't get the short remade, and that's why we didn't get um, the Amber 2 sequence in there in that one is partially because they had so much. Um, they would have required additional models and sets and whatnot.
right.
Lucario is Lucario. I tried a different picture from this movie, and I just could not get it to look acceptable to where I could fix it up and put it in here. It always just kept getting too many things off for me to say, yeah, I can fix this.
Right.
So,
But it's a pretty good model nonetheless.
yeah, so it works out fairly well for this purpose. So this will probably not be the last time I use some sort of AI generation to generate a discussion topic like this. But I definitely want
Hmm.
to give Anne a chance to sort of react to this. Not sure what exactly I'm going to do next. Now that they have the trading card game for Game Boy on Nintendo Switch Online, I can easily extract all the card art from there. And I'm thinking about trying to train something based on those pictures and then transform more modern cards. I did that manually
Oh.
for our trading card game for Game Boy discussion, where I took a card from the Sword and Shield
Mm-hmm.
set and reworked it according to the parameters of that game. But this would
Right.
be able to do something a little more direct. All right. Well, so it was an interesting product, and I learned a lot from it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we'll see. Like I said, we still have like I assume they're probably going to have something next year in terms of a movie. Detective Pikachu 2 probably won't come out until at least 2025, if not 2026, depending on when that writers/actors strike gets resolved. Animation
You can only
has a
hope.
different set of people who work on it who are represented by different folks. So, but I'm assuming they'll do something next year. I was really hoping with the Mario movie being such a big success that we'd be seeing some additional showings of other video game movies doing some digital event type stuff in the back half of this year. But so far, I haven't seen anything come up
Right.
yet. Maybe next year. Like I find it difficult. I mean, Mario, at least for now, is still the biggest movie of the year. Although, as someone who wants to see some female protagonist video game movies, having Barbie up there with it is not the
Yep.
worst thing ever. If you take one lesson away from this year, Um,
Like the Rosalina movie, it's going to be great.
well, more likely like a Metroid movie or a more Zelda-focused Zelda
I'll
movie.
take it. I'll take it.
Um, so, I mean, we had Ripley and Alien in '79, so or whenever it was. So it's but and there's at least a few good prominent female Pokemon characters that I think you could possibly make a movie out of. So I think your odds
Oh,
for that
more than a
probably got
few.
better
Yes.
this year. I'm sure the Pokemon Company is probably fielding some pitches or has fielded some pitches in the last 6 months or so. But other than that, thank you everyone who came in. Like I
Thank
said, if you're watching this in
you.
replay, please do give us a comment. We always appreciate that. All right, folks.
Thank you.